Coming up on Talking Points, the former president's winning streak continued through South Carolina, what this means for Nikki Haley's campaign.
Plus, the Alabama Supreme Court ruling that frozen embryos are children under state law, how state leaders are reacting.
And Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has unveiled his plans for Gaza's future. That and more, Talking Points starts right now.
Former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley suffered a nearly 20-point loss this weekend in her home state. Good evening. Welcome into Talking Points. I'm Chilekasi, Adele.
And I'm Ericka. Donald Trump claimed victory in the South Carolina Republican primary election. Talking Points analyst Benjamin Schiller joins us to explain the results and what went wrong for Haley. Ben?
Well, Nikki Haley, she was the former governor of South Carolina, and she lost her home state. Basically, she put the home advantage conversation to rest. And what we saw Trump beat Nikki Haley by 20 points in South Carolina. And many voters, and I was reading an article from US Today earlier today, kind of my words jumbled there. We're talking about how Trump voters focus on mainly a few different things: the border security, abortion, gun rights. So the Trump voters know that Trump was successful as a president in those categories in their own opinion, and they were basically bringing that to the ballot box. And Nikki Haley, a lot of them have cited her failures as governor in South Carolina. Even though she was governor for 6 years, they're bringing up her failures, and they were kind of remembering that when they're going to the ballot box this past Saturday.
You know, you see the MAGA base when it comes to Republicans, when it comes to Trump supporters, still backing him, right? That support that hasn't really wavered as we take a look at those results on the screen. We've got a couple things coming up. Tomorrow, Michigan. Next Tuesday, Super Tuesday, 16 contest. Will any of this be a problem for Haley as it kind of continues to unravel here for her?
Well, we saw Haley before the South Carolina primary earlier in the week before this past Saturday. She basically said she's not dropping out ahead of Super Tuesday. Super Tuesday, which is next Tuesday, March 5th. Super Tuesday, there'll be 16 contests. That's 15 U.S. primaries plus America Samoa. And she says she's not going to drop out beforehand, which means that she'll be in for at least half the primaries or close to half the primaries on the ballot box in the U.S. Nikki Haley's campaign, they are in deep trouble. They're going around the entire U.S. starting tomorrow. In Michigan tomorrow, for tomorrow's primary, Trump is expected to win this. That'd be Trump's 4th primary victory tomorrow if he wins. So basically, Nikki Haley's campaign is running on fuel right now.
And Ben, you mentioned she's in deep trouble. Where's the Haley campaign putting in most of their effort? And do you even think the Trump campaign needs to keep going with this high level of effort that they've been in the past couple stops?
Well, we'll tackle Trump in a minute, but Nikki Haley specifically, their campaign has not put out their game plan for the next week and a half or 8 days especially. But on her public schedule, she has 2 events in Michigan tomorrow. And that means then she'll go to Minneapolis and Minnesota also tomorrow night. So that's where she's spending the Michigan primary evening. But the thing is, she's going to be going around the U.S. She has an event in Denver, Colorado. She has an event in Massachusetts. She has 2 events in Virginia. So it seems like she'll be tackling the northeast and more western states as well, because the MAGA base has been playing to Trump's favor, especially in the Midwest and as well as the southern part of the United States.
Ben, when we're talking about finances here, when we're talking about money, definitely I was seeing something from Politico this weekend actually about Nikki Haley and how one of her biggest donors is starting to drop out now. Could that accelerate a Nikki Haley exit?
Well, money means everything in politics. And it was kind of interesting. So on Saturday, Politico put out an article before the Saturday's primary, and they said that Nikki Haley's campaign spent $15 million on TV and digital ad spending in South Carolina. Guess how much the Trump campaign spent in South Carolina? Just $1 million. So pretty much Trump is using his free media time to generate more votes, the VP pick. We've been talking about the VP pick for the past month. That is just free publicity for the Trump campaign. But once again, Nikki Haley, for her campaign, money means everything. They get every vote that they can get. Yeah,
definitely. We'll keep following it. Ben Schiller, thank you so much. Well, there are just 5 days until a potential partial government shutdown. Lawmakers had hoped to release a bipartisan spending deal by last night, but high-level disagreement has stopped that from happening.
But the federal government is already taking steps to begin the shutdown process. We bring in Talking Points analyst Calder to unpack this spending deal.
Ericka, Chile, good evening, guys. So I'm here talking about the potential government shutdown. And we're going to take a look specifically at Speaker of the House Mike Johnson. Obviously, with 5 days to go, he is in a very interesting place and unsure of what to specifically do. But he's had calls and he's had talks with other Republican representatives in the House. And he's been talking about a potential stopgap bill to possibly go about this and extend this deadline. But we've seen this before, haven't we? When you take a look here with Kevin McCarthy, he did something very similar just about 4 to 5 months before, and that ended up resulting in Florida Representative Matt Gaetz coming for his head and removing him from being Speaker of the House. So definitely not a position that he wants to be in, because Mike Johnson's going to have to make these really tough decisions about, does he want to make the right moves to potentially extend this deadline, but then again, will he lose his job? And there's a lot more going on as well. When you look at the budget of the House and, of course, just the government as a whole, a lot of it is being spent to Ukraine. We look at financials coming in at 36% of that money spent to Ukraine. Weapons and equipment, that's just under 1/3. 25% for security assistance, and then humanitarian, as well as grants and loans are also in there as well. So a lot of money being thrown around. But when it comes back to just looking at what we've seen with these attempts to shut down the government, we have the House Freedom Caucus, and they've come out with a bunch of different signatures, as you can see here. All different representatives coming out to make a statement about how they believe that there's a lot going on and how they don't want to support the policies of Biden here in this case. And when you take a look at everything that we've seen throughout these last 5-6 months, there's been so many problems with the government. You see on September 30th of 2023, there was a potential shutdown that got turned into a short-term resolution. Same thing again with November 16th, and then that was extended to January 19th of this year. Again, a short-term extension, and now we're coming up to 2 deadlines now. With 5 days from now, March 1st, and then March 8th will be the second government deadline. So it'll be interesting to see how this all gets played out. Ericka, back to you.
Harrison, thank you. President Biden's student loan forgiveness plan is now one step closer to reality. Last Thursday and Friday, the Education Department met with stakeholders to negotiate which borrowers should be eligible for debt relief. It marked the 4th and final negotiation session. Both the negotiators and representatives agreed it was best to avoid coming to a too narrow definition of, quote, hardship. This plan is expected to be implemented by July of 2025.
The Michigan primary, just like we said earlier, just a day away. It's tomorrow. Former President Trump narrowly won the state back in 2016, which propelled him to the White House. It was also the first time a Republican won the state since 1988. Now, President Biden reclaimed Michigan back in 2020, but again, it was tight. Both the current and former president look to repeat their Michigan primary victories from 4 years ago. We'll see what happens tomorrow. Looks like it's going to be Trump and Biden again, but we shall see. With Trump cruising through the primary races, though, he is on the march towards the GOP nomination. What a second term could look like for the former president when we come back.
Life doesn't always give you time to change the outcome. Prediabetes does. 1 in 3 adults has prediabetes, but with early diagnosis, prediabetes can be reversed. And you can change the outcome. Take the 1-minute prediabetes risk test today. Go to doihaveprediabetes.org.
Dad, they took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
A vote for Trump is your ticket back to freedom. It's your passport out of tyranny, and it's your only escape from Joe Biden and his gang's fast track to hell. And in many ways, we're living in hell right now.
Welcome back to Talking Points. After a comfortable win in the South Carolina primary, many believe Donald Trump is on track to be the Republican nominee for president in 2024. And with polls showing the former president evenly matched with President Biden in many swing states, voters are wondering, what will Donald Trump do in a second term? Joining me now with the answers is Talking Points analyst Luke Radel. Good evening, Luke.
Hey there, Ericka and Chile. Historically, the Republican Party has branded itself as the party of limited government, and the man who was once their favorite president explains why.
The American people made it plain that they want limited government, less government, that they want an extension of their freedoms, they want more local control, and they want less social tinkering than we have had over the last few decades.
But in case you haven't heard, Ronald Reagan is gone, and now a new president has taken his place at the center of the GOP, and with him a new governance of philosophy that has been anything but limited. The New York Times reported that Donald Trump and his allies are planning, quote, a sweeping expansion of presidential power in 2025 if he wins a second term to, quote, concentrate far greater authority directly in his hands. And this is not just hyperbole from the so-called left-wing media. Trump's former chief of staff, John Kelly, told the Times, quote, it would just simply be chaotic because he'd continually be trying to exceed his authority, but the sycophants would go along with it. It would be a nonstop gunfight with the Congress and the courts.
Luke, if Trump is elected into the White House for a second time, there's so many ways that this could go. What specific policies do we expect to see, if any changes at all, from the last administration?
Yeah, obviously 4 more years in office would take a lot of policy making to do. Let's take a look at a pretty comprehensive list of just some of the policies that Trump and his allies have currently been opposing. Top among them is the issue of immigration. They plan to launch a massive deportation operation against the millions of undocumented immigrants here in the United States, which would include workplace raids and detention camps being built for the migrants that are rounded up. They also want to create a brand new Muslim ban that was so controversial during the first few days of his first administration. Tariffs on all imported goods via the Trump Reciprocal Trade Act. That would be a law that he'd push Congress for that would mandate that if another country puts a tariff on our goods, then we get to put one on theirs. That's the exact same. Let's move ahead and talk a little bit about abortion. That's obviously going to be a key issue in the 2024 election. Trump and his allies have been floating in private using a 150-year-old law known as the Comstock Act to restrict access to abortion nationwide, specifically abortion pills like mifepristone, which make up a majority of the abortions in the United States. Now, there are a whole bunch of other proposals that we could get into at a later date, but frankly, this agenda is definitely going to expand Trump's presidential power and will likely be unpopular with a lot of Americans.
And Luke, obviously there's a lot of planning underway for the second Trump term, as we saw some of those things that you mentioned, the Muslim ban and tariff bans kind of being in play during the pandemic. But let's talk about the actual team. Who are the ones developing these proposals, and why does this make such a difference this time around in the Trump campaign?
Yeah, there are a few key names that have been involved in floating these proposals in a project known as Project 2025. That's an effort spearheaded by the conservative Heritage Foundation that has been coming up with this laundry list of policies. It may surprise you, but Donald Trump has not been in a back room writing out all these pieces of legislation. He has people around him helping him, people like Stephen Miller, who once served as a lawyer for him and a spokesperson for his immigration policy. He has been pushing harder on hardline immigration policies. Another person is Johnny McEntee, who headed up his Office of Personnel and in 2020 sought to root out any civil servants that were, quote, disloyal to former President Donald Trump. And lastly, you have Jonathan Mitchell, who is an attorney for President Trump. He has been arguing for the use of that Comstock Act law in order to restrict access to abortion.
Interesting to see the differences between the first time and this time, potentially based on who's talking and who's behind. Luke Radel, thank you. Now, last week, the Alabama Supreme Court ruled that frozen embryos being used for in vitro fertilization, or IVF, should be considered children. The decision shocking the world of reproductive medicine. The ruling also states that if an embryo were to be destroyed by someone, that person could be sued under the state's wrongful death law. Talking Points analyst Ethan Kraut joins us now to talk about this and give us some insight on what's next. Ethan, good evening.
Thanks, Chile. As you mentioned, the ruling has taken aback many experts in the field. The case stems from 3 Alabama couples who lost their frozen embryos in an accident in a storage facility. The ruling states that the couples can sue the fertility clinic and the hospital for wrongful death of a minor child. The justices reversed the lower court ruling which dismissed the wrongful death claim, stating that the embryos were not people or children. In his opinion, Alabama Supreme Court Justice Jay Mitchell wrote, quote, "Unborn children are quote-unquote children under the Act without the exception based on developmental stage, physical location, or any other ancillary characteristics," end quote. Now, in the narrow ruling, the justices stated that for the purpose of the wrongful death law, frozen embryos are people. Experts believe, however, that the court did not grant embryos full personhood or constitutional rights outside of the state's wrongful death statute, and anyone who destroys frozen embryos are not subject to criminal charges. With that being said, though, the ruling could be read more widely in the future and leading to cases with more rulings that restrict reproductive rights. This may include questions whether embryos have constitutional rights and if someone who destroys them can be prosecuted for murder. It is possible for the case to be challenged to the U.S. Supreme Court. However, the Supreme Court can only hear state cases that rely on the U.S. Constitution, and the ruling leaned heavily on the Alabama state constitution.
Ethan, the Yale School of Medicine says that IVF treatment is the most successful fertility treatment. Now, there's some people concerned. Will they lose access? Is that a possibility?
Yeah, so since the ruling has come down, the 3 medical clinics in the state of Alabama have shut down their IVF programs. This includes the University of Alabama at Birmingham Hospital, which is the state's largest hospital, as well as the Alabama Fertility Specialist and the Center for Reproductive Medicine in Mobile, Alabama. Now, all 3 are currently determining what legal risks they face with offering IVF treatments.
Yeah, and that's something we see with a lot of abortion restrictions as well, clinics shutting down when they kind of try and figure out what's going on in terms of how they will operate going forward, if they will. We've heard a bit about the medical field, that reaction to this ruling. What are lawmakers saying?
Republican lawmakers are really trying to distance themselves from the ruling after the backlash it has faced over the past few days. Former President Trump took to his social media platform Truth Social and posted, quote, "Under my leadership, the Republican Party will always support the creation of a strong, thriving, healthy American family. We want to make it easier for mothers and fathers to have babies, not harder," end quote. Now, this also comes as the Alabama Republican Attorney General has come out and said that he will not be prosecuting families or providers who look to have IVF treatment. Chile, Ericka, back to you.
Ethan, Kraut, thank you. With war in Ukraine raging on, both the United States and Europe have unveiled its largest sanction package to date. What these sanctions mean for Russia, right after the break.
When I was in foster care, I never knew when I would have to move, so I always had my suitcase ready to go. Then one day, I was adopted. My new parents opened their hearts and home to me. My parents cook my favorite breakfast for me every morning. My parents take me on trips I never thought I would go on. They gave me a home and an even better reason to use that suitcase. My parents aren't perfect, but they're perfect for me.
Welcome to my house. Lately, not my happy place. Everybody's pretty tired of each other. The parents were not themselves. My little brothers were morphing into small creatures. The walls were closing in. Clearly, a case of too much family, too close, 24/7. And there's a lot of that going around right now. If this sounds like your house, try going someplace new. YourLifeYourVoice.org. You'll find lots of ideas to help you handle the family stresses of being confined to close quarters. YourLifeYourVoice.org. It might not get you out of the house, but it could help you find a little more breathing room.
Hey, welcome back to Talking Points. The Palestinian Authority is facing a major overhaul. PA Prime Minister Mohammed Shtayyeh announced that he, along with his government, are resigning. This comes as the PA is under increased pressure from the West to reform and improve its operations in the West Bank. The government entity was formed in the mid-90s. It's been often cited as corrupt by U.S. politicians. The PA is also unfavorable among Palestinians. The Palestinian Center for Policy and Research says over 60% of the population wants the government to be dissolved.
And last week, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu revealed his plans for a post-Hamas Palestine. It includes a massive overhaul of its government and education system. Talking Points analyst Noah Gutfleisch is here to explain what Netanyahu's brief said. Noah?
The plan released by Netanyahu on Thursday proposing sweeping changes to Gaza. The plan detailed that Gaza's border with Egypt would be closed off and that Israel would have security control over the entire area west of Jordan, which includes the West Bank and Gaza. Netanyahu also promised that Israel would oversee the demilitarization of Gaza except for its own civil order. Netanyahu also called for education reforms in Palestine, which will shut down the UNWRA, which Netanyahu has accused of being anti-Semitic and also being anti-Zionist. However, the most notable statement in this plan was that Israel would not recognize Palestine as a state, regardless of what other nations and international organizations would want. However, in the plan, Netanyahu said he would work with Egypt and the U.S. Israel also said it wants to, quote, maintain its operational freedom of action in the entire Gaza Strip without a time limit. The plan seems to maintain Netanyahu's opposition to a two-state solution and has no mention of a ceasefire.
Noah, how realistic does Netanyahu's plan seem after 2 years of war in the region?
Well, it does seem very ambitious, and the question is, will it have international support and even some support in Israel, as actually Netanyahu's party is not polling well in future elections, and also many nations such as Qatar and the U.S. have called for a two-state solution, and Egypt also opposes closing down its border with the Gaza. So it does seem that his plan might have some issues in regards to international cooperation.
And what issues could the Prime Minister be facing if he reconsiders working directly with President Biden in the near future?
Well, they haven't seen eye to eye for a while, as President Biden has been a supporter of a two-state solution, and also many in the U.S. have actually called for a ceasefire, and Biden has seemed to maybe suggest that he would want one too, which Netanyahu has not called for and doesn't seem to want until Hamas is destroyed. So it is possible that if that Biden is done with Netanyahu and is angry enough, the U.S. could condition some aid to Israel.
All right, no, we'll keep watching it. Thank you so much. The Biden administration announced more than 500 sanctions on Russia and its military industry last Friday. It's the largest round since Russia invaded Ukraine now over 2 years ago. This is an effort to increase pressure on Russian President Vladimir Putin over both the invasion and, of course, the sudden death of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny. Talking Points analyst Alex Burstein joins us to really get at what all these sanctions mean. Alex, good evening.
That's right, Chile. These sanctions from the U.S. hit on everything from military operations to the finance sector in Russia. But like many previous sanctions the U.S. has done during this war, its impact may not be felt too strongly. These came in the same week as the death of Russian opposition figure Alexei Navalny. U.S. President Joe Biden has said that Russian leader Vladimir Putin is, quote, responsible for Navalny's death. In response, Biden announced that over 500 new Russian sanctions will be put in place. He blamed both the war overall and, more specifically, Navalny's death as reasons for the measure.
He is responsible for Alexei's death. Yesterday, I met with Alexei's wife and daughter in California, where his daughter attends college. Alexei was an incredibly courageous man. His family is courageous as well. I assured them his legacy will continue to live around the world, and we in the United States are going to continue to ensure that Putin pays the price for his aggression abroad and repression at home.
Target organizations include major defense companies in Russia, but also Russian finance organizations such as on the national payment card system. Additional targets include Russian officials that the U.S. believed were in part responsible for Navalny's death. This follows a line of sanctions that the U.S. has put on Russia during this war. The Associated Press reports that over 4,000 Russian citizens and entities have now been sanctioned. The EU and Britain also announced new sanctions this week, but these measures have had limited results throughout the war. Early on, the Russian public worried of economic downfall, and while there has been impact, the economy has been less affected than initially thought. Record trade between China and Russia has helped ease this. Wally Adeyemo, the U.S. Deputy Secretary of the Treasury, said Thursday that sanctions can, quote, only slow down Russia. That's why Biden also urged Congress to pass the bipartisan security package that would send $60 billion to Ukraine. He called out Speaker of the House Mike Johnson, who was in Syracuse last week, for allowing a 3-week recess for the House before this package had the chance to be passed. It has already gone through the Senate successfully. Back to you guys.
All right, Alex, thank you so much. Coming up on Talking Points, the Supreme Court listening to oral arguments today in a pair of cases that could transform how social networks have operated for decades, how the outcome could change internet regulations. Next.
I don't think that many kids in my son's school even do it.
He makes fun of his friend who vapes.
He would never try it.
She's into soccer.
She's on the honor roll.
She's just not the type.
No way.
No way.
No way.
No way, my kid would never vape.
Get your head out of the cloud. Today, nearly 8,000 kids will start vaping. Maybe even yours. Learn about the dangers at talkaboutvaping.org.
I don't think that many kids in my son's school even do it.
Wrapping up shop on Talking Points. With the rise of artificial intelligence and fake news, the United States Supreme Court is set to make a pivotal decision about what Americans see on social media. The main question, can platforms decide for themselves what content goes on their sites and what can be removed?
The court will consider arguments on whether to give Texas significantly more control over social media platforms and their content. The state wants to keep Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube from removing users' posts, even ones that promote hate speech and lie to voters about elections. But the issue here is the First Amendment.
Yeah, the tech industry argues that the laws violate the company's own First Amendment rights to decide what speech to welcome on their private platforms. But the states say that in current times, social media platforms are so important as a new public square that laws are needed to make them follow free speech ideals.
And the ruling for Texas and Florida could reshape a long-standing precedent, banning governments from, quote, compelling speech that is forcing private individuals to say something against their will, forcing social media companies to publish all speech, even if the platform wants to remove it, would be a form of compelled speech. Critics of the Texas and Florida law say the Supreme Court is likely to decide on these cases by June. Chile, I really think this is opening a can of worms. I think it's a fine line with free speech, and we've talked about this a little bit in Florida specifically, not so much in Texas. They've put bans on certain books. You can access those books on YouTube. How much free speech is that?
Well, it kind of goes back to the idea, too, of one, dueling ideologies between people who believe we've got to put more restrictions on social media, but also those that believe we should be kind of far back. And again, you wonder, where is the net being cast? Where will it start? Where will it end? That's what we've got to figure out as we move forward here. Well, that is our broadcast for this evening. Be sure to follow us, if I can speak English today, on X and Instagram at CitrusTV News. I'm Chilekasi, Adele.
And I'm Ericka Love. Have a great night, Syracuse.